When you think about old railway lines, you are probably thinking about something like this, an abandoned piece of track that's awaiting its eventual fate because over time industry, motorways or other events have led to closing this route, which happened fairly often. So you wouldn't even dare to think about what happened to some of the most early railway lines. Like the first railway line in Germany, opened in 1835 between Nuremberg and Fürth. But if you actually dare to visit this place, you learn that at least in Germany, the heritage lives on. Nowadays, the Plärrer is one of the most important interchange stations in the city of Nuremberg, with the 3 underground lines and 2 tramway lines connecting up. Only this artwork on the wall, showing the famous locomotive Adler, of which a replica is displayed at the city's railway museum, is the last hint left that right at this place, back in 1835, the very first train ever departed. As this locomotive was manufactured by the British, it had to be transported to Nuremberg, which took almost 9 weeks and was a clear sign that Europe desperately needed something like this, a railway. While it is common knowledge for residents of both cities to know that the first German railway line ran between their cities, many people who use the underground line U1 every day probably don't know that they are taking the same route as the Adler has done 186 years prior. As the Adler, like the U1 today, originally ran on Fürther Straße and Nürnberger Straße. But it was not long until the Ludwigseisenbahn had to deal with some tough competition. The modern electric tramway made the Adler look outdated already by the end of the 19th century. And when it ran parallel to the Ludwigseisenbahn, providing a more comfortable ride more frequently, the days of the Ludwigseisenbahn were numbered. And they had to shut down the service and declare bankruptcy, which led to the stations being demolished. For example, Nuremberg West, which is nowadays the underground station Maximilianstraße. While there is nothing left of Nuremberg West, here at Maximilianstraße you can still see the tram tracks in the road, which have been abandoned in the 80s because of this. Back in 1967, the mostly overground section between Bauernfeindstraße and Langwasser Süd was opened in the south of the city, replacing the tramways, a trend which has continued ever since. The next station, Eberhardshof, shows really well how the stations of the Ludwigseisenbahn must have looked like, being located on ground level in the middle of the road, but still separated from it. Note that this is the only place on the network where you can see the drivers reversing their trains. The U1 keeps running on ground level for quite some time, which is necessary because of this railway bridge of the Ring Railway, which the U1 has to pass under. Right afterwards, the U1 runs on elevated tracks. While the concrete does not actually look pretty at all, it is for that reason that crime and detective movies are shot underneath the bridge because of its urban charm. As you can see, the elevated station is currently being modernized. The trains can only use one track at the moment, and they cannot stop here. There are replacement buses. Every commuter who is getting in and out at the stations along the elevated track section knows that they have to exit right. But almost no one knows the exact reason why. Because when the elevated track section was first opened in 1970, there were no underground trains running yet, only trams, which, as you may have noticed, only have doors on the right side. This station, by the way, is really living up to its name, as it is located right behind the border between Nuremberg and Fürth, on Fürth's soil, but still operated by Nuremberg. Up until now, the U1's been running, as I mentioned before, parallel to the former Ludwigseisenbahn, which changes right before the station of Jakobinenstraße, however, while the U1 runs to the main railway station, which allows for connections. The Ludwigseisenbahn originally ran to Fürther Freiheit, and it had a station in Hornschuhstraße called Fürth Ost, which you can see here. Nowadays, the place where the station used to be is a parking lot where fests and the Christmas market take place. Only a few meters further west, the main railway station is Fürth's transit hub nowadays. And it's not small. It has 2 main lines and 2 branch lines going through it. It should also be pointed out that the U1 runs much further. It runs underground to the hospital and the hardware. And while they are still running their oldest stock, the DT1, they are soon fully replaced by this modern walk-through trains. So the service on the first German railway line is not going to end anytime soon. It will run between the cities for generations to come. So while the British invented the railway and the slogans, Germany, by no doubt, also runs on rails.